Oh, Penacony. Whether or not you like the Land of Dreams, it is safe to say that it had been the most polarizing storyline to have come out of Star Rail's lore. From people remarking that it was an emotionally driving, diversely casted and well-written arc to the story, to people describing the arc as nothing but a bunch of long and bloated, cheap fake-outs with a pace akin to your grandma's failing pacemaker. Player opinions just seem to bounce between these two spectrums. Now, regardless of whichever side you are on, I think there is one thing that Penacony did that really gives us a sign that Star Rail's overall story structure is changing for the better. And with the way the Shenzhou Wardens arc had been done, and the way Amphoreus is shaping up coming this new year of 2025, I think it's safe to say that this aspect of Star Rail storytelling will be something that maintains a steady rate of improvement as the story continues developing into the future. Without further ado, the name's Leafy, and welcome back to Let's Talk Slow About Games, Star Rail Edition. Before we talk about Penacony itself, I want to draw some patterns and elements that have long become Star Rail's foundation when it comes to its storytelling. Each individual arc of the story after Herta's space station has an underlying philosophical dilemma that directly challenges the followed aeon paths of each world that we visited. Belobog, a civilization following Qlipoth, the Preservation, had to fight for the survival of their people and their world. Meanwhile, Shenzhou, followers of Lan the Hunt, which excels in battle and taking lives, were forced to face the consequences of living for centuries and borderline immortality. The philosophical challenges become the cornerstone of each story arc. Cocolia's struggles with the wills of the old architects and her eventual choices were meant to make us question the sacrifices required to maintain preservation. Dunfeng's reincarnation, the fate of the High Cloud Quintet, and the appearance and doom of Mara-stricken people brought about the plight of those who yearns for immortality to prevent loss but are unwilling to bear its eventual consequences. The execution of utilizing those stories, however, is what always ends up coming short of using its philosophical X-factor. In Belobog, we barely spent any meaningful time with Cocolia herself and was expected to bond with her via osmosis through our closeness with Bronya. The concept of the architects was so vaguely explained that I don't think people even know that people like Pela is now considered an architect. While in Shenzhou, the High Cloud Quintet is basically dead as a group. The Denizen War happened ages ago. The only guy we meet who is still sane from that era was busy setting up countermeasures behind the scenes away from us, and we only really get a peek of their impacts after Danheng revealed his powers, and that was way far into the end of the arc. The principles of Belobog's survival were overshadowed by the conflict between Overworlders and the Underworlders, and eventually by our efforts of trying to save Bronya from Cocolia's methods. While in Shenzhou, the issue of immortality is only used to explain what their enemies are, and then it was suddenly about the Stellaron threatening to destroy the Shenzhou and a Lord Ravager who was trying to incite the civilization to fall into another bout of civil war. We were expected to feel the philosophical ramifications of those events without really directly feeling the impacts of those events in the first place. Only when you take into account all the other quests, textbooks, character stories and such, will you then recognize the emotions that their principles and challenges were supposed to put on you. That just doesn't really work when it comes to an extensive exposition choice like philosophy, because unless it is staring at you in the face, you'd be hard-pressed to really give it any thought unless you already had expressed interest in those topics in the first place. It's a high call to make people try to decipher philosophy during the story itself and then expect them to go through it again by reading databanks, character stories, books, and all the other side lore pieces. It's like being told by the old people in your nation to relate to your nation's past struggles when we, the people of the present, can't really feel the same tribulations of that past struggles, and all we have is stories and past experiences to try and relate ourselves to it. Like, we get it, shit must have been tough, but let's be very honest here. For any story to really hit, there needs to be an element of the personal present that showcases those struggles and issues in its full force, especially in a game where the devs have better freedom to better spread out that story over the course of its patches. Now this is where Penacony comes in. Penacony marked the first time, in my opinion, where they finally managed to really drive home that philosophical aspect of their storytelling by better emphasizing it through the involvement of current characters instead of merely relying on a nation or setting's historical narratives. Penacony's story, for all its lights, bling, and glamour, was indeed a tale of multiple tragedies that had been hidden under the guise of a blissful dream. However, the genius of the structure comes in the types of tragedies that they display, and while they still employed the whole "oh, the past was rough and things might suck now" shtick through the original cast of Penacony's former Namelesses, every other bit of tragedy is directly tied to the characters who played a major role in the present Penacony arc, meaning that we get to see a much straightforward and direct ramifications to those tragedies through the connections we made to those characters. And the fun thing is, these tragedies play on different philosophies of time and life. These philosophies being the tragedy of birth, tragedy of circumstances, tragedy of living, the tragedy of fate, and the tragedy of history. Since I've touched upon it, let's discuss the tragedy of history real quick, which in Penacony's arc revolves around the 3 former Nameless members who stuck around to help build Penacony after liberating themselves from the IPC's first occupation. This one is simple, yet is still one of the most painful types of tragedies to think about. The people of the past who has done so much to build what people see today are unable to see those glory days for themselves. Their visions of freedom and success only left to the fleeting void of what could have been, and will never bear any closure for they who have long passed before the present changes has ever happened. Tiernan didn't manage to see his wish being fulfilled by himself, Rosalina disappeared trying to figure out Penacony's biggest mysteries, and Mikhail passed away waiting for better times to come by. The only thing the people of now could hope to do is to pray that the universe has a way to let them know that their efforts had indeed not been in vain, that something did come out of their resolve in the past. Birth is the next philosophy that the game touches upon, which is told through the perspective of Firefly, a girl who was never meant to be more than she had been engineered to become, and a girl who will forever be limited by the conditions of her birth and the script that holds her to that life. What a lot of people seem to miss from Firefly is that this was really just a tale of a girl who just wanted to be a girl. While we generally see a situation where an average person wants to become someone more, this is someone who is tired of being someone more. Not only can she be a killing machine, but she can destroy a planet if she wanted to. She was made to do that, and only that. But just like anyone who discovered the possibility of being something else in their life, someone who can just live without having the caveat of perishing in the next second, and live life as normally as one could, she found herself wanting that. So, what did she do? She wanted to feel how it feels like to dream, since she was born without that ability, and Penacony gives her just that. Yet despite her best efforts to live as a normal person would, to enjoy things and to feel things that people feel, entropy loss syndrome prevents her from doing just that. She knew that being in a dream means that she was simply running away from the reality of her true body. Elio promised her 3 deaths, which I think was meant to help Firefly embrace what it feels like to truly live. The first death was not of her choice, and is painted as a cruel action that took her away from the joys of life. Her second death is one that she faced straight on and embraced for the sake of someone else, all while signaling the metaphorical death of her just being Sam. And her third perceived death is one that she can accept with closure, for she had no regrets to be left from her Penacony tenure and can wait for the time where death actually comes to pick her up. A tragic retelling of someone's birth, yet still showcasing that light and hope can still be found, even if one's origins had been painted or engineered even to be nothing but of blood and darkness. Now, the tragedy of circumstances is what Aventurine had to go through. A lot of you might be more inclined to pair his problems to his birth as well, but the real conundrum he faces in life is being a gambler who always wins, but is under the power of an organization that controls what he wins. The Avgin's decimation was indeed tragic in its own way, but it is the fact that he was essentially enslaved by the IPC afterwards is what makes the circumstances of his life being the main tragic point. I see now that the circumstances of one's birth are irrelevant. It is what you do with the gift of life that determines who you are. Aventurine happens to be someone who wasn't afforded the chance to determine who he is, and while he usually wins on paper, he never truly thought of himself to have won anything deep inside. Penacony was his way of finding a win that was truly for himself, to breach past every bit of IPC control and gamble his life away. While yes, in a way, he was still doing the IPC's bidding, he found it within himself the answer that if he really wanted to break away from their chains, then he very well could do it. And he could do it by doubling down on what he does best, which is to gamble. Bonus points for also discovering the true nature of Penacony's dreamscape. The tragedy of living is what Sunday and the dreamscape itself was supposed to represent. Sunday sought to protect Robin by creating a life through order that can never be disturbed by the plights of reality, and he perfectly guised that intent by wanting to make that life come true for dreamscape visitors instead, all because he never wants to even think of the thought of almost losing Robin once again. It is his philosophy that makes us ask, why does life slumber? Why wake up from a blissful dream when life is filled with tribulations? Because to never wake up will be to die within a dream, which means to perish without ever making any meaningful changes to your actual life. Dreaming is merely running away, but such is the tragedy of living. You cannot run away. There's just one thing to do, and that is to face it and bend it to your will. Or else, life itself would bend you to its will. A notion that Robin herself had to make Sunday recognize. And last but most definitely not least, we had the tragedy of fate. The first half of it was the one that was represented simply through Misha and Gallagher, two beings who are there to guide people to the prosperity and true values of Penacony, only to disappear into the ethers of the universe once that goal had been reached. It is still bittersweet, but unlike the tragedy of history, they at least had some closure in knowing that the wills of the people who created them were eventually realized and that they have done their job as needed. However, the one character arc that showcased a deeper form of fate's cruelty, and arguably the cruelest tragedy from the ones we've seen through these characters, had undoubtedly been Acheron's journey through nihility. To understand the tragedy of her fate and how it all compounded in her connection with Penacony, we simply need to understand what it means to be a self-annihilator. Self-annihilators are people who somehow found themselves stepping into the shadow of IX, the Aeon of Nihility. They are essentially beings and individuals who has had the fortune, or in another way, the misfortune to have survived being on the path of IX's devouring of worlds, or people who have seemingly encroached upon an existence that IX has once touched. These people gradually lose their sense of self, their memories, and eventually their sense of existing. The only thing that remains in their minds are mostly principles and values that have shaped their original personality that forced itself into the new shadowed personality. Every sensory and emotional capabilities that they have would sooner or later dull out, just as Acheron could barely taste food anymore and is able to enact destructive acts with nothing but an expressionless gaze. They wander the universe rather aimlessly and has nothing but the shadows of IX looming over their existence. IX themselves is not an Aeon that even cares about life in general, which makes the existence of all of these self-annihilators just all the more tragic since they are essentially subjected to a lifetime of being an aimless nomad until they fade out of life in some form or another. So, when Tiernan's lost soul gave Acheron that one last wish of his to see Penacony one last time, a self-annihilator who found that bit of purpose in life has been created. And with nowhere else to go, Acheron sought to fulfill that last wish in order to end the one regret that remained within the Dead Sea. It was also by fate that when she arrived, she recognized that the true Penacony isn't the one that was shown to be the land of dream and bliss that it has been so well known for. Rather, it was the simple existence that was beneath all of that. And since she promised to carry Tiernan's wish of seeing his Penacony, the one that had harbored Mikhail's final presence, Acheron fought to find that existence. By forging along with Aventurine's plot and the Nameless's intervention, she was able to do just that. A wandering, purposeless nomad who sought to find a place where people made their own sense of belonging. But the one part that truly drove home the absolute tragedy of Acheron's arc is the fact that she is the only involved character with a fate that we, the Nameless, absolutely cannot really do anything for, nor does she truly have any resolution to her abject destiny. Firefly still has her script to play and a group to be part of. Aventurine is still an IPC member with a renewed sense of strength. Sunday found a new path to follow while Robin remained steadfast with her revised duty to the family. Penacony is finding a new lease of life and the Nameless brought closure to their former members. But for Acheron herself, it spells nothing of difference to her fate. While you can argue that she might have found a sense of resolution by completing Tiernan's last wish, but that simply meant that she is now back onto the path of being a universal nomad, a person who once again is void of purpose. While she did state that she was looking to find the secrets of Device IX, a faction that was said to have remained within Nihility itself, but the existence of such a faction has never even been proven. Acheron could only pin her life purpose towards discovering the secrets of a group that may only be the stuff of legends and having nothing to guarantee finding anything at the end of her life, because that's all she can really afford to look for. And what makes it all the more tragic is the fact that she knows all of this. She knows that the chances of us meeting her again is infinitesimally low.
The ocean of stars is vast. And given our destinations, I'm afraid our paths may not cross again.
She understands more than anyone that nothing awaits her destiny. And by that, I mean literal nothingness is currently the one thing that is guaranteed to greet her future.
Even if the ending has been predetermined, that's fine. There are countless things that humans cannot change.
Yet she remains determined to make sure that, regardless of what her destiny has been predetermined to be, she will make sure that her journey would have its own meaning.
But before that, on the road towards the end, there are still many things that we can do. And because of this, the end will thus reveal a completely different meaning.
The memories made by the Acheron who has been born anew from the shadows of IX will have her own existence, whether it would be to find a new purpose or to at the very least exist in any shape or form. Until the day where she fades away into nothing more than a sense of déjà vu, she will keep trying to find a way to fight her fate. Each character in their respective arc finds a way to express and connect this link of tragedy that became Penacony's theme, and became vital cogs in making sure that the narrative panned out the way it did. Everyone had their fair share of time to find a foothold in the story, and make sure that we could feel the ramifications of all their tragedies and experience that knowledge through the direct happenings of the game, instead of having to trail off to some side quest or book pieces that would give us more context outside of the main story itself. Firefly was the Trailblazer's guide and linchpin to go through the script. Aventurine forced Penacony's vulnerabilities to show itself, and Acheron was the one to take advantage of it and discover Penacony's limbo realm. Sunday and Robin showcased the respective duality of order and harmony, while Gallagher, Misha, and Black Swan became our clue to Penacony's true nature, and we, the Nameless, were the ones that put all the pieces together. Boot Hill also served his purpose, even though Penacony was more of an introduction to his character's existence. He was mostly there to make sure that Acheron's misuse of the Galaxy Ranger title was rectified, and his real goal would be to find the man who ordered the annihilation of his tribe. A plot point for the future for sure. Hell, even Sparkle served her purpose as a masked fool. Inside chaos, all while potentially getting paid for it? Big score for her. Again, it all began with a simple question. Why does life choose to slumber? Because the tragedies of many is what people yearn to run from. Because someday, we will wake up from our dreams. Yet, those tragedies are not reason for people to not face it head on, since running away will change nothing. That struggle will always be a part of life, but in the end, that is part of what you would call as living. Of course, with all that being said, Penacony was not perfect and still had its fair share of flaws that people were rightfully pointing out, which Hoyo should definitely be paying attention to in order to optimize the way the story is being told. Problem number 1 is quite frankly the byproduct of trying to write in proper exposition for all the new characters we were introduced to in Penacony, where it creates a situation that sees a story that spans around the 20 to 25 hour mark of story content to complete be compressed into 4 patches, which means that there are at least on average about 6 hours of story to complete in every patch. But considering the fact that these numbers are not split evenly, it makes for some Trailblaze quest portions to feel exceedingly long for people who wants to keep up with it. It doesn't help that there are situations where you need to do the story first. Reason being that there are plenty of occasions where patch events require for you to complete the Trailblaze quest first to unlock, and while there is the option of just unlocking the event straight up, it may break immersion or spoil people when elements of the Trailblaze quest show up in those events. Thankfully, it seems like this is an issue that they are working to rectify in Amphoreus, as it looks like they are going to try to spread the story along the 8 patches that Amphoreus will have, instead of just sticking it all within the first 3 or 4 patches. It's either that or they are literally writing a story so big that it will be 5 hours of Trailblaze quest for every patch from 3.0 to 3.7, which I sincerely hope is not the case, because I think that's just a tad bit too long for most people's taste, I'd say, but I don't know, I might be wrong about that. Problem number 2, the switching point of view. Penacony took what Shenzhou introduced and just placed it on as many Penacony characters as they could. While it was interesting to see the different perspective of all the characters involved, the sheer amount of switching that we had to do basically exacerbated problem number 1 by adding more length to the story, and there was just a lot of character switching which caused some parts of the story to somewhat feel like as if we were slowly dissociating from the main line, unable to really keep up with the flow and eventually causing us to lose our ground. They were quick to tone this down in Shenzhou's War Dance Continuance arc, but that was also helped by the fact that there were less characters to shift through. If the devs really wanted to keep this POV switching become as regular as it was in Penacony, then they better work on making it so that they can actually cover more ground using maybe 2 or 3 different perspectives instead of using one only to show Sparkle handing out firework buttons before suddenly shifting it back to Aventurine. Problem number 3, which is a flaw that I think was a tad bit more prevalent in Penacony, were the conversation lengths. While they did a good job delivering the philosophy this time around, I think there were just some parts that could be better condensed within the story itself. I don't think parts should be outright removed in its entirety, it's just that there are some points like the character flashback scenes, scheme conversation sections, or even as much as I actually enjoyed Acheron's conversations with Tiernan, there are bits of it that could have been better summarized. Problem number 4 is really just a simple question. What the fuck was Argenti doing in the primordial dreamscape? How the hell was he able to suppress, let alone save people from a force that was strong enough to shatter a cornerstone? This guy is just Star Rail's #1 enigma, whilst also being the most blatant piece of flashy existence the game has. And that's all I have for you today, folks. I hope you guys enjoyed this dive into the depths of Penacony storytelling. Whether or not you enjoyed the arc in its entirety will really just be up to you, honestly. I'm just someone who's glad that Star Rail has finally managed to better use the one part of their narrative that gives me quite a different experience compared to the other gacha storylines that I've encountered. And I can only hope that they keep improving at it come 2025 and Amphoreus. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Feel free to leave a like if you did, and feel free to also leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Until the next video, the name's Leafy, and I'll see you all next time. Sayonara.